when AI hit, 2 years ago when ChatGPT hit the market, all of a sudden it just blew the top off the data center industry because you already had this exponential curve, and then you add on AI and all the power and infrastructure demands on top of what we're already seeing. And I don't think we've ever seen anything in human history that looks like what we're experiencing today as far as the concentration of decision makers for the dollar figure of the market that we're seeing. Hi, this is Matt Caldwell, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And today I have a very special guest joining me. I'm welcoming Matt Caldwell, who is Director of AI and Cloud Data Centers for Hyper Solutions. Matt's based in the Boston, Massachusetts area. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joshua.
Well, thanks for joining me. So I'm super curious. It looks like in your entire career has been in the facilities side of the data center ecosystem. I'm super curious, when you were growing up, when you're going through high school, when you're going through college, was this a thought in your mind that you were planning this kind of career path, or was there something that happened along the way that led you to where you are today?
No, it definitely was not on my radar. Data centers, IT, any of that. I graduated from University of Rhode Island with a degree in business. My game plan was to go to law school, so I was taking a year off between undergrad and law school. Took the LSTATs, was applying to law schools, and APC gave me a call, which I had they weren't on my radar, but they're 2.5 miles down the road from West Kingston, Rhode Island, there where I was going to school. So they're like, "You interested in selling batteries, battery backups for computers?" And I'm like, "Can I still wait tables on the weekends?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I was like, "All right, well, let's check it out." And by the time I would have gone to law school, I've been promoted a few times and saw the future in, American power conversion and data centers. So kind of that's where my career started, and kind of just been riding the wave ever since.
That's super cool. Yeah, when I saw you went to school in Rhode Island and Schneider Electric and thinking APC, because I had a fractional CTO, IT consulting SMB, but kind of business in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we actually at the time were an APC, I think it was called a reliability partner or something like that. I remember they had these great channel partner events at the time. And because of that, we ended up standardizing where every single desktop and every single server had a APC battery backup unit, which at the time was relatively, I guess, forward thinking to try to convince small businesses that they needed it, but it cut down on support costs tremendously.
Yeah, that's where my career started, just selling little battery backups for desktop computers. But I hit APC right at the right point where Neil Rasmussen and Roger Dowdell were rolling out infrastructure, which was modular scalable data center infrastructure. So modular scalable UPS, in-row cooling, hot out containment, DCSMI before anybody knew what that acronym meant, all the services that go around it. So I was kind of spoiled in my first, sales role, selling the cool toys on the playground that nobody else had in the industry. I mean, granted, everybody's caught up and the industry has pivoted from that. But at the time when we were designing, 500 kW to couple megawatt data centers, that was all the rage. And it was a great opportunity to grow with a great company. And then Schneider obviously acquired APC and kind of built out the portfolio from there. But yeah, it was a great entry point into data centers and in my career.
So Schneider was actually so much fun that was the end of thinking about law school.
yeah. But I just rode this wave and thought, the idea of stepping away from the data center industry to take a couple of years to get a law degree no longer really was of interest. And yeah, it's been exciting. I mean, we've seen a progression, throughout my 20-year career from where I started, which was, enterprise data centers, focused on the government space, to seeing, Digital Realty and Equinix roll out retail colocation. And then, AWS or Amazon figured out that, hey, we have all this spare capacity. Why don't we just lease out our compute capacity, which led to the cloud and AWS and Azure on the Microsoft side and Google Cloud. And then, really it was on an exponential trajectory from the migration of enterprise and retail colo to the cloud and wholesale built to suit colo when AI hit, 2 years ago, when ChatGPT hit the market, all of a sudden it just blew the top off the data center industry, because you already had this exponential curve, and then you add on AI and all the power and infrastructure demands on top of what we're already seeing. And I don't think we've ever seen anything in human history that looks like what we're experiencing today, as far as the concentration of decision makers for the dollar figure of the market that we're seeing. I mean, in reality, the data center market is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and an argument can be made that there's really only a handful of end users, the big logos, and then another 40 or 50 companies that are building for them, that represent 80 to 85% of new construction in the data center space. So you have a very small number of players building this massive amount of infrastructure for the next industrial revolution, which is AI.
Yeah, there's just so much going on now. Which brings me to my next question. I'm super curious, when you run into young people, they may be in high school, college, may even be a little younger than that, and they've heard about what you've done in your career, where essentially you've been working with data center engineers, data center facilities professionals for your entire career, and you went to school for business. And I've had quite a few people on this podcast who actually had an engineering degree, and that was the catalyst to get into this industry. But you run into people like that, they're super curious about these jobs. Between OpenAI and NVIDIA, constantly on the mainstream news now, and they're curious about what some of these less technical career paths may look like in the data center industry. What would you talk about with someone like that over breakfast or coffee?
Well, I can give you a real world example list, because my daughter's 18 and she just went to college, and her senior project was around data centers. And I mean, obviously I had some influence over pushing her in that direction, but I got to see in, her going to a couple of data center conferences with me, going to 7x24 and sitting through the student focused data center one-on-one training there, and kind of getting her up to speed, and then seeing her present to her teacher and her peers in high school in her senior year, and trying to explain what a data center is. And she came up with the analogy that, because kids, people in general, adults as well, have all these apps on their phone, and they're doing all this stuff, but they don't realize that everything that they're doing on their laptop or their phone, it goes to a data center somewhere that has to get computed somewhere. And they just the idea of a data center is foreign to a lot of people. So the analogy she came up with was, if you put your phone into airplane mode, everything you can no longer do on your phone is in a data center somewhere. And that was the best way she could explain what a data center is to a room full of 17-year-olds and her teacher and advisors. So I mean, my daughter is also not planning on being technical. She's going in for a marketing degree in business, kind of following in my footsteps of undergraduate business degree, and then eventually getting my MBA. But there's plenty you can do, especially now, because earlier in my career, it was very much engineering focused, very much facility focused. Now, with the hot boom in data center markets, as investors, as land developers, as power generation, I'm getting pulled further and further away from my core and what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is the electrical infrastructure within the four walls of the building. But the bottleneck in the data center space today is 100% on the power generation side. If you can get power to a piece of land that has some sort of fiber access, and when I say power, we've already tapped out the utility grid. We're now moving to phase 2, which is some transitionary behind the meter generation, mainly natural gas. But 2 or 3 years ago, there was a debate over if nuclear was going to be the future. That debate, I think, is pretty much ended. Everybody's pretty much on the same page that if we're going to continue to grow as an industry, nuclear is the only solution for generation 5 to 10 years down the road. So people are planning for that. It's the only fuel source or power generation source that makes sense for the scale that we're going towards. So now it's a matter of some combination of squeezing the last couple kWs out of the utility grid, implementing on-site generation, turbines, generators, natural gas fueled, preferably to to independent fuel sources, and then eventually we're going to be going to nuclear. It's inevitable. Just a matter of getting through the regulatory hurdles and some of the technical things that go into that. But you don't need to be an engineer to do a lot of it. There's a need for lawyers, finance, general management of these things, construction management. There's things that you don't necessarily need to be a double E or an ME to get into this space. Whereas I think 15, 20 years ago, that was a natural progression. Basically, everybody in a leadership role in the data center space had come up through the ranks of some, technical function, and now they're up here. I think the data center market's matured to the point that there's a need for a skill set broader than just the technical components that make up a data center.
Yeah, the challenge with all that, you make a really good point, is that how do you even get the awareness out there among students that this industry even exists? Because most people, when you describe a lot of the areas you're talking about, would just naturally think that, of course, you'd need to be an expert in electrical engineering to work on things related to power grids. Like, it's such a different concept, and the schools are catching up to a certain degree. My kids are around the same age, and I give credit to the schools that they're finally teaching things like QuickBooks and Salesforce and the Business Academy, and they have some cybersecurity programs. Well, you can still count on like one hand the number of higher ed places in the entire US where you can like major in data centers. So there's a long way to go.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just students. I mean, I've been in the data center space for 20 years, and every Thanksgiving or Easter, when I'm in a table full of my family, they're like, "What is it you do again?" And I'm like, "I do data centers," and have to re-explain what a data center is. And now, in the past couple of years, the script has flipped, where they're hearing, Jim Cramer on CNBC or whoever talking about data centers, and now they're showing up to the table and being like, "Hey, Matt, you do data centers, right? That must be super exciting. That's like, the next big thing. That's the gold rush that we got going on here." And, so it went from them asking me what a data center is to them at least understanding what the buzzword is and, knowing and conceptually what a data center is, and then coming to me with that. So it shows a paradigm shift for sure that conversation has flipped from them asking what I do to coming to me and being like, "I know you do data centers." That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I get from family members, "Why didn't you tell me to go into NVIDIA 5 years ago?" I'm like, I didn't see. I knew who NVIDIA was like 20 years ago, around the time you were working with APC, because NVIDIA was putting its graphics cards in Dell computers.
Yeah, and to be honest, they were on my radar. I had a good college friend of mine that was working at NVIDIA, and when I was in San Francisco, I was meeting up with her for dinner, and she was telling me what they're doing at NVIDIA, and I always kind of pigeonholed them into just the gaming space. And I missed, as deep as I'm in the data center space, I missed the fact that GPUs were going to be the future of AI, because I missed the fact that AI was going to be a thing until it was, right? So I'd say my area of expertise is a little bit more focused on the physical infrastructure. Like, once GPUs became a thing and I saw the rack densities that were going to increase, I'm like, all right, it's time for liquid cooling to really shine. It's always been in the background throughout my career. It's always been a debate, like, is liquid cooling gonna become the predominant form of cooling in the data center space? And that debate has also ended in the last 24 to 36 months, basically, on the rack densities that we're seeing from NVIDIA and the large-scale GPU deployments. It's also not a question of if, it's happening today, and we're seeing rack densities north of 500 kW per rack, which just the physics break down on trying to cool that with any sort of air. So I can see the stuff that I'm most closest to, but even when you get just one ring out there on the chip technology, that's just outside of my purview, where I missed it. But we wouldn't be talking had I caught it, because I'd be out on a boat somewhere enjoying life instead of still working, right?
Sounds like a plan. Matt, so it's a really interesting conversation for someone like your daughter that's still trying to figure out careers, and it's debatable whether even high school is early enough. At least in the area of the country where I live, they encourage students by the time they get to middle school, by like what was known as junior high when I was growing up, to pick like these career academies. But what about someone who's like more mid-career? Imagine at this point in your career, there's probably dozens or hundreds of former colleagues you have. If you bumped into someone that you used to be close with earlier on in your career, hadn't seen in like 10 years, you're either at a conference or airport or something like that, and you get together and you're sitting down having lunch, and you sense that they're a little bit burned out and they're looking for some advice about how to get their career back on track. Again, similar kind of theme. They're in a client-facing, less technical role.
Yeah, so I'm actually getting these calls from classmates of mine, undergraduate and my MBA at UCI, that are calling me and being like, "Hey, Matt, we're at a similar point in our career. We got our MBA, 10, 11 years ago now, and they're in a mid to high point in their career, and they're doing stuff adjacent to the data center space. They're doing, construction management, they're doing some sort of finance, they're doing whatever, and they're looking to get into the data center space. And the advice I'm giving them is just to network, show up to some data center events and put yourself out there, be transparent, like, hey, I've managed large scale construction projects, not in the data center space specifically, but if you can provide any sort of mission critical element to the projects that you've worked on, people will naturally transition that to, that would be applicable to the data center space. So I'm giving this advice to classmates of mine that are hitting me up, being like, "Hey, Matt, I've seen you've been in the data center space for 20 years. How do I break into this?" And my advice to them is really just, don't assume that because this is a data center role, the skill set and experience that you've put in your 15, 20-year career doesn't apply to it. Maybe it's half a step back to grow forward, but take the chance and apply for the job and make that connection, because especially now it's a super hot job market in the data center space. Just knowing the right people, just get on somebody's radar as being a reliable person that's easy to talk to and has experience, whether it's in the data center space or not, and just be that, top of mind person when they're like, "Hey, yeah, we're running a large data center construction project. We need somebody with this skill set in order to help deploy it." And really, the data center market, like I was saying earlier, is migrating from a technical play to, it's really a real estate development play at this point. There's technical elements to it, but the big blocks that need to be moved are do you have power generation? Can you get long lead time items like high voltage transformers, generators? Those are really the long poles in the tent, and then building out the infrastructure downstream of that, it's really where I've been playing for most of my career.
So if you think about the different kinds of infrastructure that exists, it's interesting because there's different parts of the data center ecosystem where sometimes a very similar kind of word is used to describe two different scenarios. Like when I talk to people on the facility side, infrastructure is exactly what you're talking about power, cooling, energy. But there's also infrastructure on the technology side. And along the same lines, like most of your career has been in sales, but some of your colleagues have like business development in the title. But there's also people in the data center industry that have the word development, and that has more of a real estate connotation than sales and marketing and pipelines. Do you find yourself having these conversations with people that are brand new, where you're just kind of trying to give them the hop on, hop off bus tour of what the industry is like? Okay, like here's the operators, here's the technology, here's the facilities, here's the construction, the real estate. People still find that confusing, or?
Yeah, I think mapping out the entire data center ecosystem to anybody can help give some clarity, and even just like the different types of data center operators, right? Are these like core and shell, just developing a real estate asset and then selling it or leasing it out, or are they actually operating the data center? Are they building it out for a specific tenant? Are they building it on spec? That's becoming a lot more dangerous today because 5 years ago you could develop a very standard data center of, hey, it's going to be X megawatts of capacity, X average rack density across the data center. And what we're seeing now is a little bit of a bifurcation where the data center has to be purpose built for high density GPU or AI training application, or AI inference, where it's actually that training model is being used, by the user, which latency is more of a concern there than the training side, or is it just a traditional enterprise cloud data center where maybe the traditional way of building it would still work, where it's that standard X kW per rack type of and a lower density type of application. So I probably lost track of the original question, but yeah, I mean, the data center market is still a great place to get into, and if you're in that business development role, there's plenty of people trying to play in the data center space. So taking a proven technology that maybe was used in oil and gas or some other industry and bringing that differentiator or value proposition to the data center space, there's still plenty of innovation to be done. And if you can hit some of the key components, I think speed to market is probably the biggest thing at the moment. So we're starting to see more modular construction off-site instead of stick-built on-site. And the reason for that is, the quicker you can get to a live data center, the quicker you get to a revenue-generating asset. So there is definitely a cost component to any sort of delay. So the more construction you can do off-site, just standard building blocks, ship it in, put it together, reduce the project timeline. There's advantages to that. And then you have, reliability and sustainability. Reliability is still very important to the data center space. Again, application specific on, I think we're getting away from the 5 nines. Needs to be a perfect, 2N plus 1 redundancy across the entire infrastructure. And it's a little bit more nuanced now on what the application is and what the redundancy need is there. Sustainability is interesting because, 3-5 years ago, you heard these grandiose schemes of net zero by 2030, and we're going to save the planet. We're going to not only be net zero, but we're going to go back and account for all the carbon we use throughout our entire company's history. And I think those sustainability plans have kind of got thrown out the window with the growth goals that we've seen by some of these big players. And not that sustainability is not still important, but I mean, in order to grow, you need to burn natural gas. It's going to be tough to claim to be carbon neutral, even with all the greenwashing in the world. So hopefully that tangent addressed some of the questions that either you had asked or you're going to ask.
Yeah, and it's interesting even that you bring up the concept of sustainability, because when I interview people on this podcast who are in Europe, they have very, very different prioritization around sustainability than there is in the US. And it's just a difference in realities and resources and culture.
Europe has some interesting sustainability plays that haven't resonated quite as much in the US. So when I was at Train, obviously looking on the cooling side, the HVAC side, there's a lot of push in Europe around waste heat reuse. So using the waste heat from the data center for, heating a town or swimming pools or trout farms or whatever else. And I kind of dug into that a little bit, and I was like, there's going to be a play here. And we looked at a couple projects in North America, one being an adjacent water park, like water slides and water park, and using the waste heat, having a data center there because it was zoned for both, and they were already going to build the water park anyway. And the idea was to build the data center adjacent to it and use the waste heat to warm the water. That never came to fruition, but I could see the future where that is a thing, where we're using the waste heat from data centers for other purposes and other unique sustainability things that we can look into.
Yeah, the couple of entrepreneurs that I've spoken to in Europe, from Deep Green in the UK and Scandinavian data centers in Sweden and T-Loop in Sweden, they all have global ambitions to take their heat reuse plans in one way, shape, or form over to the US. So at some point, there will likely be significant more awareness. And some are making significant progress with both implementations and capital raises and everything. So we'll see if this becomes one of these European developed concepts that becomes big in the US at some point.
think the biggest challenge was the distance between the data centers and where the heat was going to be used. Whereas Europe's a little bit more condensed, the U.S. is a little further out, and you lose efficiency of that waste heat the further away you get from it. So I'm actually surprised that we're not seeing more like agriculture tied to data centers and using that waste heat for grow farms. And I'm not just talking about cannabis, but any sort of indoor ag type application. I don't know why there hasn't been more synergies between those two industries. Probably some engineer will tell me the numbers reason why that doesn't work, but conceptually to me that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's one of the applications that they've spoken about in Sweden, is putting the data center next to greenhouses, and especially in Nordics and Scandinavia where it's so cold, that plays well with being able to give free heating to help run agriculture, free hot water for showers and everything like that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 or 10 years if that starts to make a significant dent.
Yeah, it makes
data
sense,
center locations.
Right? You build a data center where it's cold, so you don't have to use as much power to cool the data center, and then you create heat, and you do a greenhouse, which you couldn't grow crops year round in that environment because it's too cold. The same reason you're building a data center. So anyway, that's why it kind of clicks in my head. But anyway, somebody's going to figure it out eventually.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
You raise an interesting thought as well when you're talking about modular construction. So besides development and business development, and besides infrastructure on the technology and the facilities side, I was interviewing someone a couple months ago who's doing modular construction for fuel cell based data centers. And I said, what parallels does this have to modular data centers? He said, absolutely nothing. So it's just that you have two different words. You have this developed concept of building a data center in what to many people would look like almost like an RV. And that's been around 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden now people are also realizing that if parts of a data center are built offsite in a factory, that they can roll out and deploy much more rapidly. And in an area where grid capacity is driving so much of locations, having that flexibility to move faster seems like a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, modular has been around, as long as I've been in this data center space. But I do think that we've reached a tipping point where it really is taking hold, whether it be a full scale, modular component, or just an integrated skid where you're pulling all the pieces together and have a repeatable model where you're building the same module over and over again for the integrated skid, and then just dropping it into an indoor area mechanical space within the data center, and you're eliminating a lot of the on-site labor, which is a huge bottleneck, right? If you're building in North Dakota or the middle of Nebraska or wherever else, a multi-gigawatt data center, the idea of how you're going to get labor to these places, and you're basically building a factory town around the data center construction site. The more you can do offsite and limit the number of resources that you need actually on the location, is going to save labor costs. It's going to speed up the deployment. There's quality advantages to it, just replicating it offsite as opposed to having somebody turning wrenches on the actual development. So yeah, it makes sense, and I think it's really starting to gain traction now across the power, cooling, the entire data center construction process.
When you look at what's going on nationally and potentially even globally in this industry, where do you think the biggest challenge is right now aside from power? What's the biggest problem that you see across the board that if you could impart some of your decades of wisdom on some of the key stakeholders, you think would really move the needle?
Yeah, I would say power is definitely the number one, but getting past that, I think the two would be labor. And then the second in parallel to that is the supply chain, right? We're not quite at the point that we were like right post COVID, but there was a couple years, 21, 22, where people were buying chillers and power equipment like it was toilet paper and paper towels and just warehousing it and knowing like we gotta get these um, pieces of equipment before we can have a legitimate data center project, because we know if we go out to bid, it's going to be several years before we can get this equipment. That I think has calmed down a little bit. There's a little bit more availability, especially on the low voltage side. Medium voltage is still some long lead time equipments like high voltage transformers and generators and that sort of stuff. But we've moved from an industry where you could hire a consulting engineer, design a data center, give it to your procurement team, put it out to bid, get 3 bids, and go with the lowest cost that meets the specification. The data center industry is growing at such an exponential rate that you really need to lock in your partners ahead of the project and know who has availability, know the supply chain of your supplier to ensure that they have access to critical components. Like in my world on the electrical side, breakers, transformers, the control metering equipment, like those are all bottlenecks that within our supply chain that need to be addressed. And if you're a client, if you're a data center developer and you don't have those relationships with your suppliers locked in and you're just putting it out to bid, you're competing with everybody else. And what really happened was you have the big players, you have the Schneiders, Siemens, ABBs, Eatons of the world, who have a massive amount of, and this is on the electrical side, there's a mirror image to this on the mechanical side, but on the electrical side, you have these big players, and they have a massive amount of production capacity, and they're expanding as well. But the thing with them is they have these massive capacity agreements with the big hyperscalers for several years out. So it's gone from these small blocks of orders to these massive chunks in their supply chain, or in their, I shouldn't say supply chain, their production capacity. So when you go to a big supplier and you ask for their lead time and capacity, you're basically trying to cherry pick build slots out of their existing manufacturing line, which has opened up a secondary market, which is these smaller players that never played in the data center space that have 60, 100,000 square feet of production capacity that are bidding on these projects, but they're bidding to 10 different clients. And really, when they lock in one decent sized data center order, that's going to fill their entire production capacity, and they're going to be locked down for a couple of years. So this is kind of dovetailing into hyper solutions and the business model that Dennis Streeter and Vlad Gukharov came up with, which is we fit kind of somewhere between those two, which is we have the data center experience, 30 years on either side. Dennis on the Schneider side of things through LDP, and Vlad from his experience with PDI and Eaton, came up with this business model where we design hyper solutions, electrical gear, low voltage electrical switchboards, PDUs, STS, RPPs, and it's our UL listing. Hyper is responsible for sourcing the critical components like breakers, transformers, metering, and we own the process and the quality control, but what we don't own is the 4 walls of the building. And what we do is we go to adjacent industries in the high-tech space and basically lease out their production capacity where they can't build for any other data center manufacturers. But what that gives us the ability to do is scale in a way that other companies aren't able to, because we call these satellite partners. We have 9 of them currently, and we have 49 that we are in some phase of pre-qualification for. We can add on that 10th, 11th, 12th satellite to increase our capacity in a way without putting a shovel in the ground and without any sort of capital expense, upfront capital expense, in a way that the smaller guys aren't able to scale, in the way that the bigger guys doesn't really fit their business model. So we're really taking advantage of this boom in the data center space, and we have high quality, and we can scale to the needs of these big growing data center clients.
Yeah, as you were starting to describe that, it was sounding a lot like the limited amount that I learned about hyper solutions. And it seems there's almost a near perfect parallel with the experiences people sometimes have with data center operators, where they're a relatively smaller mid-market company. They go to one of the largest operators and they feel like they're just a number. They're not getting the attention that they want because they are a very small customer relative globally to the size of that client list. And they're like, okay, we want a relationship with the CEO, one of the principals directly. So they go to a colo operator that's 2 or 3 facilities. Like, no, they're too small. We want somewhere in the middle. And it sounds that's a lot like the client base that you're ending up with, where they're going to the larger companies. The larger companies don't have enough capacity to give them priority for time to delivery. The small ones don't have the resources to make that happen. And it's all capital intensive to ramp it up fast.
Yeah, and the interesting thing there is that when I mentioned those big players, they are the co-opetition, right? They sell what we sell, but they're so maxed out that we have partnership agreements with them, or we have access to their UL listings, and we'll build their equipment for them when they run out of capacity, which they're already at, right? So not only are we sourcing the breakers from Siemens and Schneider, but we're also partnering with them where when they don't have that final assembly capacity, we're sourcing their breakers for them, and we can either build Hyper's product, or we can build using their UL files, the Schneider or the Siemens equipment as well. So we're kind of the spillover for the big OEMs, plus we're our own company in and of ourselves, and that's really what's been driving the business up to this point. But we're growing exponentially. It's pretty insane, the amount of growth within Hyper and the industry as a whole.
So there's like a retail side of the business and more like a wholesale white label kind of the business.
Yep.
Super interesting. Matt, a lot of your career has been with relatively large companies. Hyper Solutions seems like it's a little bit a different kind of environment, a little bit more on the smaller side. So I imagine you have a little bit more latitude with like the tools and the tech stack and the hiring and the strategy, whereas you may not have had quite as much input in the past. If you look at the tools that you use on a daily basis as a sales professional in this space, do you have any favorites that are must-haves that if someone internally, like in a finance or IT role, came to you and said, it's just, we have too much sprawl, we're running, 150 SaaS apps. Can you help us narrow it down? What would you fight real hard to hold on to?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak to this in the relative size and point in time that Hyper's at versus some of the big OEMs, right? The big OEMs have a massive infrastructure, process, policy, people that are operating the business on a daily basis. Hyper, we just hit our 3-year mark. We're growing like crazy. We're hiring like crazy, but we're in a unique position where we are scaling our business, leveraging AI from the get-go, whereas these larger companies are trying to implement AI and displacing existing policies and people and procedures, right? And I'll give you an example of that. As we're increasing our engineering resources within Hyper, there's a real discussion around, is this a person hire or is this an AI tool that we can implement to make our resources more productive? So just as an example of that, if we are doing a CDE, for a bid that we have that's come in, we can have an applications engineer reviewing that document, and that's a comply, deviate exception to all the specifications that are mentioned there. So we can have an engineer go through that and say, yeah, we comply, we deviate, whatever. And that'll take them, let's just say that takes them 4 hours, and they can get through 2 of those in one day. If we have a AI software in-house to Hyper Solutions that can evaluate a CD&E and spit something out in, say, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? And it's 80% done. We've seen this, we can comply. We've seen this, we can comply. And drawing from a database of previous bids that we've evaluated. And then it goes to the applications engineer where they can quickly scan through that and then get to the 20% that needs their attention and get through one of those in, say, an hour instead of 4 hours. Now they can get through 8 in one day as opposed to 2. We still need an application engineer. We still need a systems engineer to be a customer-facing resource to our customers. But that just makes our engineering staff that much more productive, and it's less disruptive to the organization than if you're in a big company and you have a pool of 80 application engineers and you're looking at it through the lens of, we can use the software to reduce the number of application engineers we need. And, that creates disruption and even let's just say they cut 20% of their staff because the remaining staff are that much more productive. That remaining staff also has this taste in their mouth that, like, AI is after my job. The more productive I am, the less of me is needed. So it's coming at it from two different perspectives, I think. And I'm drawing just from complete hyperbole here. It's not like I've actually seen that in the big ones, but I can tell you from Hyper that we're an AI first type of organization. So any way that we can leverage AI as we're developing our process and procedures and leverage or making our internal resources that more productive, that's where we start. That's the ethos of Hyper Solutions.
When you were describing that was my first thought, is it sounds like you have a huge competitive advantage with being AI native, in much the same way 10 years ago you had these companies that were born in the cloud or cloud native, as opposed to having to deal with all the technical debt and legacy baggage of client server investments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an exciting time. I mean, I'm pretty pumped about AI and what it's going to do. And I'll give you my favorite use case. That I was listening to a interview with Mark Zuckerberg, and he was describing industries or solutions that aren't possible without AI. And his example was a call center for Facebook or Meta, right? He's like, we have 5 billion users. A call center is not a viable option for us. There's no, the size of the call center would be the size of a small country, and it's just not feasible to have a customer support number. But with AI, you could create a AI application that could address 99.5% of the customer support calls that come in. So now you can have a customer support number that addresses 99.5% of the questions that people have. And now that 0.5%, you could staff a call center to support that. And as they're answering these one-off questions, that's going back into the algorithm. So now the next time somebody asks that same question, it doesn't have to go to a human being. It's just making the AI application much more robust. So I think we're going to see those instances where, because of AI, there's solutions that are possible that just were not feasible before the advent of AI. And we're also going to see existing call centers disappear, because there's going to be a transition point in the next 5 years. I'm not sure exactly where the tipping point is going to be, but right now, when I call into a customer support number, I am immediately hitting 0. I want to talk to human, because the call tree on their call center is so burdensome or aggravating to me that I'm not getting the right answer. I just want to talk to a person. As AI advances, there's going to be a point in time where I don't want to talk to a person, because the answers that I'm getting out of AI are better, higher quality than the one-off answer that I'd be getting from a human that had to be trained, and they only have 6 months experience. It's nothing against them. It's just, as you're putting a human into that situation, their view or their range of possible answers is limited to their experience and what's on their sheet. Whereas AI, the algorithm is going to get better and better and better over time. And there will become a point in time, and I'm predicting within the next 5 years, that when I have the option of talking to a person or talking to an AI agent, I'm going to prefer to talk to the AI agent. And when that happens, you're going to see a massive disruption throughout that customer support call center arena. And I think we'll see it in other aspects of our lives and the economy as well.
I think we're already starting to see it to a certain degree on parts of sales, even B2B sales that are very commoditized, where the unit economics make it really tough for staffing with people, especially in certain geographic locations where the comp is considerably higher. Even among some of the bigger data center operators, I've seen them move, like sign up for things like bare metal to look more like e-commerce, whereas 10 years ago, there would have been an inside sales team. There may not have been dedicated reps, but there would have been people. Now they've determined that certain parts of this are at a price point where it's just not palatable for unit economics to have salespeople involved. I remember hosting going through this 15, 20 years ago in the early days of web hosting in the late 90s and early 2000s. There actually were people that were selling SMB web hosting.
Yeah,
not so much anymore.
I think what you're going to see is people buy from companies, people do business with people, right? So I think you're going to see if it's anything that is a commodity, if it really, there's not a lot of differentiation, there's not a lot of complexity to it, you're going to see that direct sales person with a heartbeat going away from that. There's going to be marketplaces that address that need where, hey, I just need X number of this component that meets this specification. I need 3 quotes. I need to know price, lead time, what maybe reviews or some past performance of that equipment, whatever. And then you're going to see on the solution side, on the people do business with people side, that's still going to exist, right? So you really need to stake a claim if you're getting into sales, business development, working for organizations in more of a complex environment. And we see a lot of that in the data center space where it's not just a commodity sale. Even if it's a chiller, if it's a piece of electrical hardware, there's so much more that goes into it regarding the reliability of the lead times. This is going to actually arrive on site. I want a person to be able to manage that relationship back within the organization that I'm doing business with. And I would encourage my daughter, I would encourage anybody getting into the data center space to lean towards that side of things, the more person-to-person complex solution sales as opposed to the commodity side of things. And I joke that my unofficial title, Director of Steaks and Beverages, that job description is going to be the last job that AI can take, right? Because there is a value to sitting across the table from somebody eating Wagyu and drinking a nice glass of Cabernet that you cannot replicate with an AI agent. And at the end of the day, people want to do business with people. They want to trust people. They want people who are not just looking to sell them something, but actually solve a problem. And an example of that is getting a call from a client that's like, hey, we've got an immediate need. It has to be something off the shelf. It doesn't necessarily fit into Hyper's business model. I'm not going to say, hey, no, we can't help you. I will ask internally. I'll say, hey, is this something we can do? And if it's not, I will go to the industry and be like, I just got to solve this person's problem. I don't have a stake in the game. I'm not trying to make money off this, but I need to solve this customer's problem, because when they have that big order, when they're looking for more of what fits into Hyper's business model of building quality at scale, I want them to think of me as a person that can solve any problem, not just the immediate need that fits nicely into the square box of the hole that Hyper can fill. And I think that's really my advice to people getting into the industry, is be somebody that's useful, somebody that can solve problems, kind of like Shawshank Redemption with Red. Like, you can get anything from the guy. Like, you want to be that guy for your segment of the industry, right? When I say segment, I'm not even just talking about power cooling, but like the physical infrastructure, the IT hardware, kind of fit what is the world in which I live in? What are the solutions that I can provide? And then align yourself with the best organizations in your industry, where you can solve most of the problems that your customers are asking for.
So it's not just a matter of being very discerning about the companies that you align yourself with, for sure, making sure that they're solving a complex enough problem that the unit economics are strong enough to sustain the kind of professionals like yourself, but it's recognizing just how much it's way beyond just being an account executive or a similar kind of role. It's being truly seen as a consultant and a teacher and a subject matter expert and a trusted advisor when it comes to anything and everything that's directly or indirectly related to your category.
You said it way better than I did. Thank you.
We look at that's a lot of what we think the future of sales, being the future of AE, looks like, to get back into that journey that by default is now very self-propelled and very self-driven. Because Matt, you're essentially competing for time against someone going to ChatGPT and saying, I don't know, Schneider, Vertiv, Legrand, they can't deliver. What are my alternatives for being able to get this? And you'd much rather be in a position where your prospects and clients come to you and say, hey, Matt, can we set up a time to talk? I want to bounce something off of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing about the data center industry is that the pie is growing so quickly that everybody's helping each other out. Whatever you do, your niche in this space, because you're not doing something exactly the way everybody else is doing it. So as opposed to other industries or other times in the data center space, it's not so much cutting up the pie. It's just the pie is expanding so quickly, just filling the void of like, all right, what is needed in this space today? And it makes for a very nice industry to work in because of the fact that there's competitors of mine that are also close personal friends because we grew up, we came up through Schneider Electrics together. And we also know the same mutual friend who's working at an owner now, a developer that we're talking to. And we can all sit at a bar and have a drink together and be cordial and, share ideas, about industry or whatever else. And not so much worried about who's getting which slice of the pie, but just watching this thing grow. And that's kind of the biggest selling point for me talking to people outside the industry on why they should get into the data center space is because it's a close-knit community of people who all know each other. And for the most part, they're all looking out for each other's best interests. So it's a fun time to be here for sure.
That's terrific, Matt. I appreciate you sharing so generously about your career experiences and advice for people that are just getting into the space, people that have been in this a while, people that are looking to explain where their company fits into the construction and power and grid and everything that's going on going forward. If someone wants to follow what you're working on or reach out to you and learn more about yourself and Hyper Solutions, is LinkedIn the best place to start?
Yeah, I live on LinkedIn. So if you're looking for me, LinkedIn, just send me a connection request or message, and that's probably the best spot to find me. And
for Hyper, is the website the first place you'd send someone?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's just hyper.com now.
Cool. Yeah, we'll include links to those in the blog and in the show notes along with this episode. But this has been terrific. I really appreciate you sharing so generously today. I've been speaking with Matt Caldwell, who is the director of AI and cloud data centers for Hyper. Matt's based in the Boston area. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, Joshua.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.